Not one people has yet ordered its life in accordance with the principles of science and reason. There has never been an instance of it, except only for a moment, out of folly. Socialism is by its very nature bound to be atheistic, because it has proclaimed from the very first that it is an atheistic institution, and that it intends to organize itself exclusively on the principles of science and reason. Reason and science have always, today and from the very beginning of time, played a secondary and a subordinate part, and so they will to the end of time. Peoples are formed and moved by quite a different force, a force that dominates and exercises its authority over them, the origin of which, however, is unknown and inexplicable. That force is the force of an unquenchable desire to go to the end, and at the same time to deny the existence of an end. It is the force of an incessant and persistent affirmation of its existence and a denial of death. It is the spirit of life, as the scripture says, rivers of living water, the running dry of which is threatened in Revelation. It is the aesthetic principle, as the philosophers call it, an ethical principle, with which they identify it, the seeking of God, as they call it much more simply. The purpose of the whole evolution of a nation, in every people and at every period of its existence, is solely the pursuit of God, their very own God, and faith in Him as in the only true one. God is the synthetic personality of the whole people, taken from the beginning to its end. It has never happened that all or many peoples should have one common God, but every people has always had its own special one. The first sign of the decay of nations is when they begin to have common gods. When gods begin to be common gods, the gods die, as well as the faith in them, and together with the people themselves. The more powerful a nation, the more individual its God. There has never yet been a nation without a religion, that's to say, without the conception of good and evil. Every people has its own conception of good and evil, and its own good and evil. When the conceptions of good and evil become general among many nations, then these nations begin to die out, and the very distinction between good and evil begins to get blurred and to vanish. Reason has never been able to define good and evil, or even to separate good from evil, not even approximately. On the contrary, it had always mixed them up in a most pitiful and disgraceful fashion. As for science, its solutions have always been based on brute force. This is particularly true of that half-science, that most terrible scourge of mankind, worse than pestilence, famine or war, and quite unknown until our present century. Half-science. Half-science is a despot such as never been known before. A despot. Half-science is a despot that has its own priests and slaves. Half-science is a despot before whom everybody prostrates himself with love and superstitious dread, such as has been quite inconceivable till now, before whom science itself trembles and surrenders in a shameful way. I detest half-science. I raise the people to God. And indeed, has it ever been otherwise? The people is the body of God. Every people is a people only so long as it has its own particular God and excludes all other gods in the world without any attempt at reconciliation. So long as it believes that by its own God it will conquer and banish all the other gods from the world, so all believe from the very beginning of time, all the great nations at any rate, all who have been in any way marked out, all who have played a leading part in the affairs of mankind. It is impossible to go against the facts. The Jews lived only to await the coming of the true God. and they left the true God to the world. The Greeks deified nature and bequeathed the world their religion, that is, philosophy and art. Rome deified the people in the state and bequeathed the state to the nations. France, throughout her long history, was merely the embodiment and development of the idea of the Roman god, and if she at last flung her Roman god into the abyss and gave herself up to atheism, which for the time being they call socialism, it is only because atheism is still healthier than Roman Catholicism. If a great people does not believe that truth resides in it alone, in itself alone, and in it exclusively, if it does not believe that it alone is able and has been chosen to raise up and save everybody by its own truth, it is at once transformed into ethnographical material and not into a great people. A truly great people can never reconcile itself to playing second fiddle in the affairs of humanity, not even to playing an important part, but always and exclusively the chief part. If it loses that faith, it is no longer a nation. But there is only one truth, and therefore there is only one nation among all the nations that can have the true God, even though other nations may have their own particular great gods. And the only God-bearing people is the Russian people, and these are not the silly old platitudes that have been ground in all the Moscow Slavophil mills, but the only word of regeneration and resurrection.